What's going on YouTube? OCD for EDC here, and what I got for your face balls today is we're going to talk about the mechanics of folding knives. I get a lot of questions all the time. I do a lot of disassemblies on this channel, and I get a lot of questions about how to make a detent stronger, or what happens if the detent ball falls out, or in the case of a lot of Kershaw knives, people want to de-assist them, and how to make that work properly. So we're just going to go over a few of the, I guess, kind of do's and don'ts, and some, tips, tricks, different things like that. And I'm going to show you what the purpose of the detent is, why it functions the way it does, and we're going to first start talking about Kershaw knives, and specifically speed safe knives like this Kershaw Knockout. This applies to the Kershaw Knockout, the Link, the Dividend. There's multiple knives that have the speed safe, and a lot of people want to de-assist them. And I'm not saying it's not possible. It is possible. However, it's a little bit more involved and a little, probably a little bit more advanced than what most people are going to want to try and tackle. And I'll get into it and explain that. So first, we're just going to go ahead and disassemble this knife real quick. So this is this happens to be the Kershaw, what is it? 1870 CF M390. There you go. Dishes are done. So anyway, this here happens to be a limited edition model that was in carbon fiber and M390. Pretty cool knife. Certainly brings a lot of value to the table, given the materials that this thing is made with. But I just went ahead and pulled the pivot out, which is a T8, and then the body screws on this one are T6. So we're going to go ahead and get those out of the way, and I'm going to show you what this knife has going on inside here. All right. So this is where the speed assist or assisted knife speed safe works, and these are the components that make it up. What you've got here is referred to as a torsion bar, and this torsion bar you can see corresponds to a hole right there on the blade. I'm going to set some of these parts off to the side, and let me get the blade out of here. So there's a little 90-degree bend on the wire. The wire sits into a hole right there, and when you close the blade, it preloads this torsion bar. If I can hold on to it. It preloads this torsion bar, and it jams it back into this corner of this milled out area of the carbon fiber, and it builds up tension. And when it builds up that tension, so you've got the speed assist torsion bars like this, and when you close the knife, it kind of bows that spring, if you will, and then it puts the spring on the opposite side of the center line of the pivot. And so then you have this stored energy with this spring in a bent state. And then when you go to open the knife by either pressing on the flipper tab or the thumb stud, the minute that this center line of the wire passes the center line of the pivot, that's when the spring tension takes over and it flings the knife blade out. All right, so that's how this setup works. It's hard for me to show that to you with all this stuff out. I'm going to go ahead and remove these washers. But if you can imagine, when this is all put together and assembled, when the knife is out in its open state, there is no tension on this bar at all, and it's only when you go to close it does it, like I said, shoves this end up into the dead end of the pocket that's milled out, and it bows this spring. So essentially this portion here is going to have a bit of a bend to it, and so that's what creates that that tension holds the knife closed, as well as creates that snapping action when you go ahead and open it. Now, with all that being said, get all these parts out of the way. When you look at a Kershaw Speed Safe knife, you can see here that it does have a detent ball in the lock bar. This confuses a lot of people, making them believe that they can de-assist this knife. The problem with that is there is no hole for that detent ball to drop into. And what I mean by that, and I'm going to show you on this knife real quick here. Let me open this knife up. Oop. This here happens to be the Tucson TS-129. It's a great little front flipper knife, but this is just kind of your standard frame lock knife. And I just grabbed it because it comes apart real easy and only has 2 screws to make this quick. So I'm just going to set these parts off to the side. But you can see here that on the lock bars, oh, I'm losing parts here, guys. All right, so you can see here on the lock bar, both lock bars have an over travel stop, which is great. So you don't push the lock bar out too far and remove the spring tension on it. And you can see that both lock bars have a detent ball, one right here on the Kershaw and one right here on the Tucson. Now the difference is on the Tucson with a manual action, you can see here the detent ball path, this line that goes all the way around. Now this one does have a detent ball ramp, but you can see the path that ball takes, and it drops into this hole when the knife is in the closed position. So when I have this knife and I'm in the closed position, you can see there that ball is going to line up with that hole. So when that ball drops down into that hole, that's what provides the retention to hold the knife into the handle. And I have to overcome that by, when I go to open up the knife, it's lifting the lock bar. So it's got to overcome the tension of the lock bar to then let the knife pass and the blade come out. Now you can adjust lock bar tension by bending this more. You can see just in its rested state where it is. If I were to bend this to make it sit further in its rested state, I would be increasing the lock bar tension on the knife. That's certainly something you can do if you have a knife that has a weak detent. But really what creates this detent system and what creates really good flipping action on a knife is this hole, the shape, the size, the lip of the hole to the flat of the knife. So, if you had a nice chamfered edge around this hole, then that ball would be able to come up out of that hole easier. So, if you come in here and polish this action, if you chamfer that hole a little bit, you might ruin your knife because you may make the detent very weak and make the ball be able to come up out of there too easily. Now, the distance that the ball sticks up out of the lock bar, or in this case, the lock insert, that's really important as well. So, all these things matter to create a really good detent on a knife. So that's how a manual lock bar knife works. So in the case of this Kershaw here, we do have a detent ball. However, when you look at the blade, and you can see, it goes this direction here. So this is the side of the knife that the detent ball rides on, and you can kind of sort of see, hopefully I can show that in the camera. You can see the path that the detent ball takes right here. It's kind of hard to see, but there's no hole at the end of the path. This hole right here is for the speed safe. It does not line up with the detent ball that's in the lock bar. The only reason these Kershaw models have a detent ball in the lock bar is just to keep the lock bar from essentially grinding on the face of the blade. So that little ball is there to kind of act like a bearing, just to keep this whole flat surface from grinding on the blade itself. So in order for this to work correctly, if you were going to de-assist this knife and take this torsion bar out of the equation, you would have to make a hole in the blade right here for that little detent ball to drop into. Now, the depth of that hole, the edge of the hole in relationship to the face of the blade tang, the location of the hole, the diameter of the hole, all of those things are very, very important to get this to function correctly. So I'm not, like I said, I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm just saying that it's a lot of work, and you would have to figure out exactly where that hole needs to be. You would need to figure out the exact diameter that hole needs to be, because when this knife is closed, you want, in the case of this Tucson knife here, this thing has a stop pin that is mounted in the blade. Well, at the exact moment that that stop pin, let me see here, at the exact moment that that stop pin bottoms out in its track, so you can see the pin in the blade here, and it lines up with that milled groove in the carbon fiber and in the titanium. But at the exact moment that that pin bottoms out in the titanium track, that ball drops into that hole. So all of that geometry has to be worked out and work perfectly. And if it's not, what will happen is you'll have blade rock in the closed position. When the knife's closed, the blade will move a little bit. So these are all really, really important things to make it function correctly. So in my opinion, it's just, like I said, not impossible, but a lot more complicated than just pulling this little torsion bar out and thinking that the knife is going to function the way you want it. If you pull this, well, I can just show you what's going to happen. I just had a guy who has another YouTube channel hit me up about this last night, actually, and asked me if I could do a video showing how to strengthen the detent on one of these knives. And as soon as he told me it was a Kershaw knife, I knew that this was going to be a problem. So, like I said, it's the Kershaw, the Knockout, the Blur, or not the Blur, the Knockout, the what am I trying to say here? The Link, the Dividend, and there's some others I'm sure that I'm missing that I can't think of right at the moment. But I'm going to show you what happens when you assemble this without putting the torsion bar in there. Let's get this washer on there real quick. Let me get this backspacer on. Alright. Get this guy put together here real quick, and then you'll see what I'm talking about when you do not have that tent or torsion bar in there. You're going to see that this just does not work properly, and yeah, it's just not going to be what you're expecting or what you want it to be. And then I'll show you some other things here. Let me get this. All right. So what's going to happen here is when we have this all reassembled, the knives in there, or the blades in there, the washers are in there. It's loose. I'll get this tightened up. Still got too much blade play. All right, we're getting pretty close there. So right now there's nothing holding the blade into the handle. So when I go to flip it, it just does that. There's nothing providing that blade retention, so I can push on this and push on this in order to build up some potential energy. And then once that lock bar pops up and the detent ball comes up out of the hole, that's what gives it that snapping action for the blade to come all the way out. Now you can see here, if I do that, it still locks up well and everything's fine. The blade's locked up. That part works just fine. However, without having this torsion bar in there, the blade will just fall out like that. There's nothing to hold it into the handle. So that's the potential risk that you run by de-assisting those Kershaw knives. So let's go back to this this Tucson model here, and I'm going to go ahead and throw this back together here like so, and let's put the bearing back in, and I'll show you what it is that I'm talking about here. Oh, okay. The pivot was close enough. So this one here has a D-shaped pivot, so I just had to make sure that it was in the correct location. But these are questions that I get a lot about just the mechanics of a knife and what's possible to, as far as modifying them, or making it work better, or lightening, making the detent lighter or stronger. There's just a lot of things people want to do. Good Lord, this screw is fighting me. Without really fully understanding the mechanics of how the whole system works. And there's a lot of geometry involved, and a lot of pretty minute measurements and stuff that really are going to make a difference on the retention. So when the blade is in the closed position, when I kind of pull on it, not enough to pull it out, but I can't push the blade in, and I can't pull there's no wiggle there. The blade is secure in the handle. And so when I go to open this blade and I pull it, you can actually watch the lock bar there. I don't know how the best way to show this off, but you can see that the lock bar will raise up right there. You can see that lock bar as that detent ball comes out of the hole. It raises that lock bar. So you have to overcome. So when you're pushing on this knife with this opening hole here, you're pushing, and you got stored up energy, and then it breaks free, and then the blade comes open. And so a properly tuned detent will allow you, and offer that really nice snappy action. And there's tons of knives out there that don't have, dropping stuff here, don't have, properly tuned action. I can think of multiples actually right at the moment that, the detent is just super weak, and so they're not good, reliable flippers. And it makes for just a really lazy, sorry action on a knife. So one of the other knives that I wanted to talk about that came up in question is the Spyderco Smock. The Spyderco Smock, even though it is a compression lock knife, this is really just a button lock. A liner lock works the exact same way, whether it's on the back side of the blade or up here. Yes, it's a compression lock, but it essentially is just a liner lock knife, and this one just happens to be actuated with a button. So it does differ from some other button lock knives that are just plunge locks, but still it's very similar in the way it operates. However, the Smock is a one of a kind because it has a secondary detent ball, and I'm going to show you what is going on inside there. Well, first, before I do that, so you can see here with this Smock, when I push the button, the blade just drops, and it's like a gravity knife. So if I hold the knife in this orientation and I push the button, the blade will drop right out of there. Sorry, my finger was hitting it on the backside, but the blade will drop right out of there, which is why they consider this to be a gravity knife. Because if you remove the second detent, which this one I did remove, the blade, as long as you have that button pushed, the blade just swings back and forth. So it's got very great action. No issues with blade centering. But still, though, with the flipping action, you know, you can use the opening hole or the flipper tab back here without pushing the button, and it creates a good flipping action because the detent is dialed in correctly. But let's get into this, and I'll show you the second detent and why it's there and what it's doing. So this is a T8 on the pivot screw and T6s on the body screws. Let's get this guy opened up here. You do have this lanyard tube back here that, you know, it's not super tight on this one, but on, you know, some Spyderco models, the lanyard tubes are kind of tight. So you can see right here, there is the lock bar, and the reason they call it a compression lock is because you have a stop pin and the lock bar gets locked between the stop pin and the blade tang. So as I open this knife up, and you can see inside there, you'll see the opening pass, and once I get to that point, the lock bar drops in, and now when I push on the end of the blade here, it's trying to compress the lock bar in the vertical dimension between this stop pin right here and the tang of the blade. So it's an interesting setup. It works quite well. And certainly it's a fun one to, you know, just because the action on it's so good, and because it just acts like a gravity knife. Let me get this off here. There we go. All right. So on the Smock, you have these phosphor bronze washers that are drilled for stainless steel bearings. But you can see here, that's where the lock is actually applied. You can also see the detent track with the detent ball hole there. This has got a little bit of dirt in there, so let me wipe that off quick. Okay, so here we go. So you can see here, this is the detent ball hole, and then there's a detent track that comes around over to here. And on the actual liner itself, you can see the detent ball right there. And just like on the other frame lock knife, when it's in the closed position, you can see the hole, and you can see that the detent ball lines up with that hole in the closed position. In the open position, the lock bar is up on this layer right here, or this level of the blade tang, and then you've got the stop pin is bottomed out in the liner right there. Now on the Smock, and only on the Smock, this is a feature that is just on this one model. Clear that up here. You can see that you have this little hole right here in the liner. That little hole corresponds with the little hole in the scale itself. So let me show you here. So you've got this little bitty hole right here, and underneath it in the scale material, there's a little hole right there. And what goes inside that hole are tiny little parts, which I put in this little deal right here, but I'm going to get them out so you can see them. And what you have is a detent ball and a tiny little spring. If you can see that, hopefully you can. They're very, very small. And so the way this system works is you would put the spring down in that hole right there in the scale material. And then on top of that, you would put that detent ball. And the detent ball protrudes through the hole in the scale, or I'm sorry, in the liner. So you've got the spring down in this hole and the detent ball on top of it, and then you set this on top of all of that, and the ball protrudes up through that liner just a little bit, and it's under spring pressure, and it rides along the tang of the blade just outside of the diameter of the primary detent ball track. So if you can see here, this knife's really new, so it's hard to, the detent track isn't very pronounced, but you can see the arc, hopefully, where the detent rides, and the secondary detent rides just outside of that. You know, it's just, if you look on here, and if you imagine this being a circle, you can see where the secondary detent is. You know, it's maybe just 1/8 of an inch or something outside of the primary detent circle. And all that does is it provides friction to keep the knife from just dropping. So here is the Knife Joy exclusive smock, and it still has the secondary detent in there. And when I push down on the liner button and I let the knife drop, you can see it does fall, but not freely. It doesn't just swing like the one that I removed that secondary detent. Now, removing the secondary detent doesn't hurt anything. Like I said, all it does is it makes it function and be free swinging, if you will. This knife here, regardless of what I'm doing back here with this liner and button, it always has some degree of friction against the blade. So even when I hold it like this and push the button, the blade doesn't just fall out. So Spyderco put that secondary detent in there as a safety feature, if you will, because some areas, what they call gravity knives, are not legal. So that's what that whole secondary detent system is all about, is for safety reasons. And if you want to remove it, just be aware, if you disassemble a smock, be aware that is in there, because if you're not, it will go flying. Like I said, it's under spring tension, and it is on the liner side, or the lock side of the knife. So just, you know, if you take it apart, not knowing that those parts are there, they will go flying, and hopefully, if you can see them down in there, they are very tiny, and you will never see them again. So, anyway, so just trying to clear up a few of these issues. You know, I've had a bunch of questions about several different things. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is detent ball ramps. You can see here that that kind of hump groove that's in that blade tang. This is actually the Kaiser Sheepdog XL, and this is the knife that several months ago I posted a video showing how to put a detent ramp into a knife blade. So you guys can go back through my videos and check that out if you're interested. I show you how to install a detent ramp into a knife. I don't know if you'll be able to see this well or not. If you can see the detent ball there, it's kind of hard to see. Yeah, so you can see it sticking out of the liner right there. But essentially, by putting a detent ramp into a knife, you can just make the action much smoother on the close. Instead of having a big step that you got to push it over, it just makes it very smooth and seamless. So as soon as you release the lock bar and the blade the blade tang is riding on the lock bar. You can watch here as I shut that, you'll see the lock bar start to push away from the blade and that gap get larger. It's because you're on the detent ball, and now the detent ball is just riding on the blade itself. So it's there's a lot of things when it comes to the mechanics of knives that I feel like maybe people don't fully understand, or not taking them apart to really see how they operate. I'm just going to throw a little bit of KPL on there, and while I'm talking here, I'm going to go ahead and reassemble this guy. But so depending on the knife, you may or may not be able, as it applies to assisted knives, you may or may not be able to de-assist a knife, depending on the way it's constructed. Some of the older Kershaws, you could de-assist the knife, and a lot of the newer ones, you cannot. You cannot de-assist them easily and have them function properly. Anybody could go in there and take the lock bar out, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to do that if the knife's not going to work correctly when you reassemble it. At least in my opinion. To each their own, but that's my opinion. So it is something that, certainly. I pushed the pivot out the other side. There we go. And of course the screw falls. The joys of trying to do this on camera. Certainly a lot more difficult trying to assemble and disassemble and reassemble things on camera. You can't, I try to hold it in ways that you guys can see what I'm doing, which certainly is not the way that I would normally do things, but yeah, hopefully you guys can see what it is that I'm doing here. But so now that we got the smock back together, let's see. Oh, the pivot's way loose. All right, so blade is centered, and you can see there that the action, the knife, once you get it past center, it just falls. So let me show you the difference. So the one in my left hand is the standard smock that does not have the second detent, and the one in my right hand, it does have the second detent, and it will fall like you see there. And as far as the opening is concerned, you can't tell a difference, but let me show you. Yeah, so I'm going to flip them both at the same time. You can see that they're very, very similar. On the opening action is really no different, but on the close, this one falls and this one doesn't. See, I still have both buttons pushed, and so I can shake that one in, but then when I hold it in this orientation here, if I push the button, this one just falls out. If I push the button on this one, it does nothing. So I can just go ahead and open it, but there's enough friction there that it holds the blade in. And then back to our Kershaw, you can see there, this is no good. But when we add that speed safe back in this knife, and personally, in my opinion, when it comes, I'm not the biggest fan of assisted knives. It really just depends on the model, honestly. But assisted knives are generally not a huge, a big thing that I'm looking for. But again, to each their own. And let me see here. I'm just going to go ahead and set this down right there. Push that back in. All right. We need to open the knife blade up here, like so. Get that to drop down. Swing this back around here. Actually, I'm going to put this in here like so first. So the other thing is with these assisted knives or the speed safe assist, you definitely want to have the grease in there. If you don't, the speed safe will rattle around that torsion bar when the knife is fully assembled, and so that's definitely not something that I would like anyway. So I guess, to each their own. But all right, so now I'm going to try and get this back in there. Hopefully we got it. I think I did. I think I felt that drop into the hole. And like I said, the in this case here with the speed assist or the speed safe, that bar not only provides the assisted opening action, but it also provides the blade retention. So that's why you cannot de-assist this knife easily. The one nice thing about these Kershaw speed assist knives is that they do not have any retention against the blade when you're get the backspacer on these things is kind of a pain in the butt. They don't have any other pins in the backspacer. It's just the two screws, so it's pretty easy to get that backspacer off. Okay, that looks good. All right, we got it's a little loose, but because it provides the blade retention as well as the opening action, so we're pretty well centered there, and action is good. But the first 90 degrees, I've got a video about this particular knife right here, but there's really no, tension from the spring until this point right here, which is great because it makes this a one-handed knife. You can push it to that point right there, readjust your grip, and then push the knife closed. So unlike some other knives that, do have, like a full-blown side opening auto, that it has spring tension as soon as you break the lock loose. That's more of a two-handed affair. I'm not saying you can't do it with one. I'm just saying this makes it a little easier. So, in my opinion, just keep these guys assisted. I do have one other Kershaw. This video is already long, so at this point, who really cares? But let's see here. I don't remember on the blur how the assist works, if this one's de-assistable or not, but we're about to find out. So it may or may not be made just exactly like the Knockout. I just don't remember. It's been too long ago. But I'll show you here. Hopefully that second screw came out, because it was spinning the whole entire. There we go. All right, so you can see the speed safe mechanism looks very, very much the same. And the key, oh, nope. So the blur has a detent hole. So you can see the detent track, and you can see the hole right there in the blade. You can see it has a detent ball. So this one, potentially, go ahead and wipe all this grime off of here real quick. So the blur is potentially de-assistable. We'll find out in just a second. Oh, come on. There's a little bit of Loctite on those screws, making it hard to get them out, but you're going to have to remove those in order to get this this cover off of here. Just like that. Take out the torsion bar there. Same assembly. Okay. Now, let me go ahead and put this back in. Just like that. I'm just wiping that off just to get the dirt and grime off of it. This thing was pretty dirty. Get those spacers back in. Let me wipe this side off. And we will see if we can make this de-assisted real quick and see if it works. Just gonna throw a little KPO on there. Got plenty of oil on there, going LTK style. Go ahead and drop that down. Now on these Kershaw models, they do have one larger washer on the lock bar side and one smaller washer on the show side. So keep that in mind when you're doing maintenance on your Kershaws. All right. Okay. Let's see if we can get this in. There's one. The Blur is actually a knife that I like quite a bit. It's a really good one for a thumb stud assisted knife. Thing works really well, and you know, Kershaw's showing us constantly that you can make a good knife for reasonable money here in the States, which is quite interesting. You know, the Blur, the Knockout, the Dividend, the Link, those are all U.S. made. I think the Leak is as well, U.S. made Kershaw. I might be wrong on that. All right, so right off the bat, I got the pivot way too tight. I still have the pivot way too tight. So it does actually provide a bit of blade retention. Yeah, you can hear it. Let me see here. So it does lock in, and it does flip well. So the Blur is de-assistable if you want to. Now the detent on it is not stellar, but it's okay. So the Blur is one that you can de-assist if you want. The Knockout, however, is not. So anyway, guys, I've been going for way longer than I should have. Just wanted to talk about the mechanics of some of these knives and what makes them work and not work and what you can and can't do and all those things. So if you got any questions, leave those in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Have a good one. Hope everyone's healthy and safe.